So, hello everyone. Please say hello if you can hear me. Yeah, very good. Good to see you all. So, I'm Urvashi. This is Meena. We've already been introduced to you. And we are going to be talking about feminisms in India. And I use the word in the plural because there is more than one kind of feminism. And we're going to be talking from the perspective of two different generations. Meena's generation, which is the next generation down from me, or maybe the next generation down from that even, and my generation of feminists who came to feminism in this country in the 70s, in the mid-70s, and then have remained connected with it. The immediate context of our conversation is a book that Meena has recently published called Affective Feminisms, looking at feminisms built in digital spaces, not only in India, but across the world, but focusing a lot more on India. And almost by definition, the connections that are built through the digital media or different mediums are connections created and built by younger feminists, because to them the digital comes naturally. So I have my take on what Meena is trying to say in that book and the phenomenon that she's trying to mark. But I'm going to start by asking her to briefly describe what she's actually, the argument that you're making, Meena, in the book.
Thank you, Urvashi. Hello, everybody. It's a very important moment for me because I also get an opportunity to talk to generations that have come after me, growing up as a feminist academic maybe. There are younger women here who would probably understand and decipher much more of what the digital holds for you, the potential that the digital has in a way to write your dissent, your rebellion, your rage maybe onto digital platforms. So this book, in a sense, was born on an afternoon in 2017, if I can call it that, where at the Kerala at the International Film Festival of Kerala, I was the moderator of a session which had numerous women stars of the Malayalam industry, film industry, discussing about women in Malayalam cinema. So I began with the question of how fair has Malayalam cinema been to its women? And, the rage boiled up because I don't think that anybody here would agree that Malayalam cinema has really been fair to the women of Kerala in its representational politics, in its visual iconography. So the question was raised, and all the women talked about an industry that was in the grip of, many of the masculinity myths, the hegemonic patriarchal practices that are in place. But there was particularly Parvati Thiruvoth, who spoke about a particular cinema that had been released just the previous week. And she spoke about the misogyny that is written into the very structures of Malayalam cinema. Now, there were heated debates and discussions, but by evening, we were all called feminiches. So the word feminici, I'm sure that many of you identify with that word today. The word feminici was born, and the digital platforms in Kerala were rife with very, very misogynist posts and comments on what the feminicis are doing, particularly against Parvati. Parvati responded very interestingly. She had an embroidered handkerchief as her, picture, which said OMKV. You all know that, right? OMKV, which actually was showing a sign of a protest to these kinds of comments. But what was very interesting for me as an academic was also the way in which my own students, my colleagues, the women around me in Kerala took up the title of, feminici, which began as a slur, owning it up and saying that, yes, we are feminicis, So that was a moment when feminicis became, what began as a slur where was owned up by women and said that it is also a sign of our protest. And the digital exploded with, you know how both groups, there was slut shaming, there was all kinds of trolling, and everything happening, but then the women did not concede defeat. They took up each and every post and retaliated. So for me as an academic, this was an explosion of the rage, the protest, the disgust that we women had with many of the existing patriarchal beliefs and mindsets that are there in our workspaces, in our public forums. What I also was very interested was the fact that mainstream media had never given a voice to these kinds of protests. And women were claiming the digital spaces that were available to register this protest. And that, in a sense, was a moment which I took up and began recording this turn into the digital, where the medium also became a kind of a message. The medium itself became political for ordinary women who had been denied voices to register the quotidian protest and the rage that they were experiencing in their everyday lives. So this is what the book is about. It talks about feminities. It talks about the Me Too. It talks about happy to bleed and ready to wait also, which many women, claimed. So all these very many, maybe not the kind of major protests that happened earlier. These were all claimed by women. Rima Kalingal's fish fry debate, for example, all these were brought into the gamut of the book and discussed in detail. So this is what the book does, Urvashi.
So Meena, thanks for pointing that out. To me, what you're saying brings home really something that I've always believed, which is the importance of history. So when you start by marking a moment where an insult is thrown at women, and that insult is then taken by women and transformed into something subversive, just the way women own the word slut and so on and so forth, it's not the first time, okay? The word feminism and feminist itself was first used by a Frenchman as an insult towards women, and was then taken by women in Europe, in the UK particularly, and turned around into a positive thing. The word black has often been used as an insult, and so on. So it's not as if history does not have these examples. And my question, I want to provoke you into thinking, what are you saying that is unusual or different? And don't answer yet, because then the further question that I want to ask you is, of course it marks a moment of rage. There is no doubt about it. Of course it marks a moment where the kind of voices that you might not necessarily see, voices like yours and mine you hear all the time, but other voices have a chance to express their rage. But that is what happened in the Shaheen Bagh protests across the country. Those were the voices that you don't actually see. So other than, and again, I want to ask you this as a provocative question, not because I think it, but it's a question that gets asked. Other than sitting in the comfort of your home, or sitting in a bus, or sitting in a metro, and hashtagging something, and registering your protest, what is this affect doing in terms of actually fighting for change? Because when you look at feminism on the ground, and when you are actually fighting for change in a physical environment where you are confronting people who hold power all the time in more ways than one, so you might face violence, or you might have to negotiate, things happen which force your feminism to rethink much of the anger and many of the issues, and which force you into thinking of strategies which could be long-term campaigns. But here, what concerns me and what you talk about in your book, and it would be great to hear a little more about you, is the temporality of this kind of protest. It's ephemeral, it happens. But how does it add up? What is the cumulative impact?
I think that's a very serious question that I've addressed in the book in large detail. But the question that Urvashi raises about, this being an ephemeral phenomenon, for me is also slightly problematic because I think that the large-scale mobilizations that happened earlier were definitely affective. The anti-rape protests and the mobilizations were all affective. And I definitely would not claim that this provides a kind of a disruption from earlier feminist protests. There are definitely continuities. There are strands that continue the earlier rage and the nature of the protest itself. But then comes a point where the medium is also taken up by women, younger women particularly, where by 2012, for example, when the Nirbhaya moment happens in India, here is a large section of young women who have been given liberal education, who have done women's studies in classrooms, who have maybe been afforded numerous choices that the market gives them, which is also a post-feminist kind of a moment as far as we are concerned. So the market says that you're equal, that you have all the choices that men have. But that is also a very tantalizing yet misleading prospect, right? It is written over by structures of privilege that maybe if you don't have the historicity that Urvashi is speaking about, can create bubbles within which you locate yourself. So I wanted to look at it as a continuum where the earliest strands of protest and rage and dissent and political speaking were woven into new media practices. I'll just give you one example. Now, you spoke about it as maybe temporal or ephemeral. But say, for example, within the precincts of the very private sphere, as we always have the divide between the private and the public. How many of us can voice our rage in public forums? How many of us can talk about the quotidian realities and the oppressions that we face in our everyday lives? So here was a space. I'll just give you one example. A friend of mine would not do anything. She belonged to a very, very patriarchal, conventional setup. All she did was she went on Facebook and she put up pictures every morning of everything that she had cooked. There was a particular thing that she had to cook, or for her in-laws. For her children, there was another set. Her husband needed something else. So all these were put on the dining table and photos were uploaded onto her Facebook page. Now, underneath this, people started commenting. Her labor, which had been rendered invisible all these years, suddenly became a commodity. I'm not talking about it in terms of commodification, but it was visibilized. So here was an ordinary woman making her labor visible on a public space. And I think it became a quantifiable labor because women came underneath and said, how do you do this? You have to go at 8:30 in the morning. How do you cater to all these needs? And that became a politics in its own right, I think. So here was a woman, an ordinary woman, who would not have found that kind of voice or visibility engaging in what I thought was a very subversive activity of visibilizing her labor, which had always been unpaid domestic labor. I hope you understand the significance of that moment. And with the Nirbhaya again, what happened was there were very fluid, tentative coalitions that happened online. So many issues that maybe would not have got a voice on offline platforms or digital or mainstream media houses suddenly became visible. Women were protesting and they were putting it up on Facebook, and entire coalitions of affective possibilities became aligned under that post. Now, I'm not saying that this can have larger political import. I'm saying that these were, maybe micro efforts at rendering visible what ordinary women were experiencing. And the coalitions that were built around them were not major protests that were there out in the streets, but they were nevertheless tentative, affective, coming together over a certain kind of possibility that the digital media offered.
Actually, Meena, you're saying many things here, and I want to try to tease them out a little bit because I think they're very interesting for the histories of feminism in our country. So one of the things is that I think when women of my generation came into feminism, I think we were very, very lucky because our political thinking, the cutting of our political teeth was facilitated by the fact that there was a huge series of protest movements around us, not only feminist, but also in the 20 years post-independence, India was seeing a lot of protests about the dreams of independence having gone sour. There were student movements, there were anti-price rise movements, there were peasant movements, there were movements for the environment, etc. And it was easy for us to step into those. For the young today, and I find that a lot with my students, for example, the question is, okay, so I'm a feminist, now what? What do I do? Where do I go? How do I put this into practice? So in a sense, what you're marking is something that is a partial answer at least to what do I do question, how do I express my feminism question. At the same time, I think there's a whole lot that has changed around us because all our societies, as all of us know, the democratic spaces of protest are shrinking. Our states are no longer that accountable or want to be that accountable to citizens. And even physical protest is constrained. So again, when I was young, long time ago, when we would take out protests in Delhi, you could go almost right up to the Houses of Parliament. You could go to Boat Club, which those of you who know Delhi will know is a 10-minute walk from the Houses of Parliament. And after that, 10 of us or 15 of us could take a petition and be allowed to go into the Houses of Parliament and meet any politician, including the Prime Minister, who might come out and receive our petition. So it was a different moment. That is not possible now, right? So what are the realms of possibility? The internet is one of them. So again, that's why I keep emphasizing history. It's important to see the context and history which creates this. And I think definitely the fact that on-ground protest is no longer seen as part of the practice of democracy and part of the practice of change pushes people into doing this. Then there's another point. When you talk about your friend who's putting out what she's cooking every morning and making visible the labor, and suddenly people realize that labor is visible everywhere on our damn streets. When you walk out on any street, you will see women working, 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 working. There isn't a moment that they stop. No tea shop will see women sitting there drinking tea. There will be only men sitting there drinking tea. So it's visible, it's just that we don't see it. So there is a different kind of seeing that takes place on the net, perhaps. There's a different kind of rendering visible, which is all really dependent on the effort of the woman. And I think one of the things that digital feminisms have marked, so I'm not on the opposite side, I'm just seeing it as a phenomenon in the way that you are, but from where I'm placed in history, I'm seeing things in it which are continuities and which are also cleavages. So in a sense, I think what the internet has done is allowed us to talk about those things that were taboo. You talk a lot in your book about menstruation, about the happy to bleed, about the happy to wait campaign in the context of Sabrimala, where women say we are happy to wait, certain sections of women say we're happy to wait. You talk about rupee cores, putting out of menstrual images for which she gets trolled and pushed off and all of that. And this is an amazing opening up from the time when people like me, it was impossible for us to talk about menstruation. We used to use these euphemisms. Are you down? Nobody said, I have my periods. In my office now, my colleagues will come and say, boss, I have my periods. I'm not feeling good. I'm not going to be able to attend this meeting. And it's quite normal. And when we went out to buy menstrual products, I guess men don't notice this because they don't have to do it unless you went out to buy them for your sisters or your mothers or something. But when we went out to buy menstrual products, you had to wait in a shop till every visitor was gone. You didn't have to say anything. The shopkeeper, who was usually a man, knew what you wanted. And then once every visitor was gone, he would pull out sanitary pads from under the counter, wrap them up first in newspaper and then in black plastic, and then give them to you, and you hid them under your dupatta and went home. So that's the kind of moment from which we have come to this moment, the digital moment, in which you can actually talk about these things. So I think there's a lot of stuff happening there, which is really interesting. But I want to ask you if you could talk a little more, expand on this notion that you talk about in your book about affect. You say that these are communities of affect. To me, affect is a very academic word. And the moment anybody says affect, I want to run a mile. And you mentioned just now when you were talking, post-feminism. I think there's no such thing. You know, again, that's an academic word. It is meaningless in our context, and I don't know why it is used. Can you talk a little more about these things and also a little more about how you differentiate affect from emotion? Because actually it's an emotional bond you're making. Yeah. So what's the difference? So it would be interesting to hear about that.
Yeah, thank you, Urvashi, for raising that question. Affect is definitely academic. You know, people like Deleuze and others have talked about it. But the way I want to see, Urvashi talked about an earlier generation, which I too was a part of. I still remember as a girl of 13 walking into a medical shop and asking for, earlier we had something called Stay Free and all those things, which had strings. And there was nobody in the shop. And the young man who took it out and gave it to me fingered it and said, "What is this round band?" He was actually trying to humiliate me, right? And the shame and the rage that I felt, I could not put it up anywhere. You know, as a young girl of 13, being questioned by this man, I remember stuttering and stammering. I didn't know what to say, but I felt extremely humiliated and shamed in that place. Now, there was no way that I could register my protest. There was no way that I could say that, hey, you know, you have no bloody right to ask me that question, right? So this was the rage. This was, again, as I said, these were all emotions that were channeled by earlier feminist protest movements and mobilization. But when it comes to the affective turn, this mobilization becomes medially driven, you know. The possibilities of becoming, you know, now from being to becoming becomes more concrete. So affect is not just an emotion that you register, but affect also traces the trajectories of how you can harness that emotion to new possibilities, which is what women are doing today. See, for example, when Rima Kallingal talked about that fish fry that she was denied at home, and I think most of the women in this room would agree. I have had pregnant women, students, coming and telling me that they would love to have eaten good fish, but in the house they were only served those parts of the fish that the men wouldn't eat. You know, I think you and I have undergone that. You have seen your sisters undergoing that, or mothers undergoing that. Now, in the 19th century, for example, in Kerala, we had menstrual leave. Women being allowed, you know, young girls in Travancore, for example, being allowed 4 days of menstrual leave. And even the Tindari Puragal that we had, or the rooms that we had, where 4 days of rest actually were given to women. But then in the shift to modernity, you know, the notion of pollution remained, but women's labor became co-opted. You did not get any rest on these 4 days. I still remember in the family house that I would come to for my vacation. I grew up in the north. The idlis would come flying, you know, because nobody would touch us. You would be in a room and you would be given a plate and a glass and a pie to sleep on. And the grandmother, you know, the rest of the family wouldn't touch us. and the idli and dosha would come flying in the morning onto the plate. But even then, you got 4 days of rest. Now, in the shift, in the turn to modernity, this rest was taken away. Women did not have those 4 days of rest because the labor was important. Whether it be unpaid domestic labor or paid labor, whatever be the case, the labor was important, but the stigma of pollution remained. So that was the way in which modernity co-opted, created a modern subject of women, but then subjects of women, but nevertheless the stigma was still attributed. So this was one way of responding to it, harnessing that onto new possible mediums, where you could speak about that. Go to any of the major, media houses and say that I want to talk about it. Do you think anybody would give you the space? They won't. Even when Rima went online and spoke about this, in a TEDx talk about the fish fry, I saw so many eminent men saying, "Avarku rendu meen vartham kodutera, avarde prashnam theerumello." Right?
Translate.
People saying that, just give her a couple of fish fries. Her anger and her agony would subside. Now, she was addressing a larger question. And this in a country where I think more than 1/3 of the women are undernourished. Right? Undernourished. And if it was not a fish fry, if it was a morsel that would prevent you from stepping into starvation, the boy would still get it. Right? Erase the structures of privilege. If there is a morsel in the house that can be fed to one child, the boy child, the way the Indian cultures operate, the boy would still continue to get it. If it was education and only one child could be educated, the boy would be the one who would be educated. Now in Kerala, we pretend that we are beyond all these things. And the trolling that Rima got in the public spaces, in online spaces, in the digital sphere, actually talks about the kind of misogyny that is so entrenched into us that we refuse to see what she was trying to address. Right? And especially being an actor, it was easier to body shame her and to troll her and take up images of from movies that she had acted. Also, Urvashi, I think in a place like Kerala, it's all the more important that I speak about it. You can talk about many isms, but most people would say, "Ayye, njan feminist alla." Right? Because it's considered to be derogatory. It's even the word feminism, to claim that any kind of feminism, I'm not saying that there is one particular kind of feminism, but just to say that I'm a feminist is derogatory. So it's all everywhere because the audience is Malayali.
Yeah.
So this is the historical context in which media gave possibilities, right? A new medial turn.
Okay. So look, we've got 14 minutes. I want to leave the last 10 for questions if we have any. But can you just take 1 minute very quickly? Because you're pointing out in Kerala, and I mean, Kerala can lay claim to many things, but they can't lay claim to the fact that feminism is seen as a bad word here, because that's a much wider claim. All of us know feminism is seen as a bad word. There's reason for it also. I mean, it's the history of the word, where it's coming from, it's an English word, and so on and so forth. I want you just, if you can take a minute to talk about, in that context, talk about post-feminism.
Yeah.
What do you mean by post-feminism in a society where feminism also, as you're saying, is seen as a bad thing? So then can we be in the post phase?
Yeah. I think by post, I don't mean a chronological kind of the end of feminism and the beginning of a new kind of maybe word. That is not the way in which post-feminism has been used in academia. I'm sorry that I brought in an academic word into maybe a larger discussions. But then post-feminism means a kind of stance which the new generations of women have taken, which again, Urvashi already spoke about, a certain kind of an amnesia towards earlier moments, where the politics of the moments, the mobilizations, the trauma and the angst of earlier feminist impulses are conveniently erased by the market to tell you that you are all equal. It is a market-driven kind of an economy where women are taught to believe that, it's my choice. Remember that very famous small video that went viral. It's my choice. But do we really have choices? Aren't the choices that the market gives us not exactly political in the way that an earlier feminist movement would have talked about it? So the choice to be out and maybe in a public space like this is not exactly the choice that we are talking about. It's not exactly the mobility that we are talking about. So post-feminism attempts the way in which earlier feminist impulses were hijacked by the market, and there was a kind of a pretense that the market offers you everything. I always bring in this example of this very famous or infamous jewelry ad from Kerala, in Kerala. I have to explain this, which I keep on talking about. There's this bride decked up in complete jewelry, and she says, "My father gave me the choice to go to whichever jewelry and I liked. The choice was mine." Now, the father or the mother don't give her the choice of choosing her life partner, but she has a choice of which jewelry she can visit in order to get her, wedding finery. Do you understand what I'm talking about? So, market, it's a kind of a bubble that the market creates, and post-feminist becomes a term that academics have used in order to look at the manner in which the market has co-opted.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there because we're at 10 minutes and 44 seconds. Before I open it up for questions, I'm just going to make one comment, Meena, to you, that I understand what you're saying about post-feminism, but I think to the phenomenon of the market attempting to co-opt feminist histories does not mean the market has co-opted us. You know, there has been strong resistance to the market, and the fact that the generations today do not have access to feminist histories is not the fault of those generations, but it's the fault of the system in which we live, in which only certain kinds of histories get written. Even the Malabar Rebellion here, for how long was it actually known in mainstream history? So I think those things are things we have to just keep in mind. I mean, I'm forever emphasizing the importance of history, sorry. Okay, questions or comments? We have 10 minutes. Yeah, there's somebody here right in front. And then over at the back. So just make sure the mic comes to you, please. Keep it short.
Yes, ma'am. Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, I'm a student of Miranda House, and I'm studying sociology. And we have a paper called Sociology of Gender. So the first day of the class, a professor, just to make a point, she asked a class of 65 students, and all women. She asked, "How many of you are feminists?" And perhaps 2 or 3 people raised their hands. And I was one of them, and I was extremely shocked to see that my generation of students don't believe or don't understand perhaps the idea of feminism. And the professor, of course, was extremely shocked. So I think, ma'am, what I'm trying to ask is, Miranda House was a space that was extremely feminist, extremely in the forefront of the women's movement, especially in Delhi. And it has changed. It has changed so much so in this manner. How, ma'am, when did this happen, and how has digital media contributed to this? I just want.
Okay, thank you. Can we take 2, 3 questions? Can you ask your question, please, over at the back? That lady there in blue. Oh, okay. Okay, then we'll have 3 questions and then Meena can respond. We'll come to you after that.
Thank you, ma'am. I have read your book, Affective Feminisms, a very political intervention that you have done to the whole seminal aspects of the feminism and so on. So my question is just, it's a kind of a hypothetical question. I just want to know about the future of feminisms. Like, we have post-feminism, we have feminisms in digital media. I just want to know about the future of feminisms. Like,
small question. Yeah. Thank you. And then the last one from you, please. Yeah.
Ma'am, I too have the same question. And in the current political scenario, what will be the future of the feminism, especially in India?
Would you like to answer first and talk about
Ma'am,
particularly that Miranda House?
I think, no, you just respond.
Ma'am,
The question
I
is
do
a
have a
wider
question.
question. So.
I do have a question.
See, I have never said it's the end of feminism. Sorry, don't put words. No, 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 no.
No, but when you say post-feminism, that's what it sounds like.
Ma'am, somewhere I have read like this. Actually, there are two kinds of people. Either they will be sexist or they will be feminist. What is your stand on this?
I think none of us would subscribe to those kinds of binaries now. It's not either or kind of a thing. I think all of us have feminist impulses within us. There are also moments when we suppress those feminist impulses and play along with societal norms. We all undergo that. Don't put words into my mouth. I have never said that it is the end of feminism. I'm just saying that there are post-feminist impulses all around us, where the market does give us, spaces and choices and pretend that this is feminist. I'm saying don't get co-opted by the market. No. Post and post-structuralism doesn't mean the end of structuralism. It's not that post as in after. That's why I said it is not chronological or linear. I'm not speaking about it in that manner at all. But the way in which the higher ideals of feminism has been co-opted, and it is something that I think every young woman in this room should be wary of, including, I'm not saying I'm young, but all of us should be wary of the way in which the market has tantalizing techniques by which feminist impulses can be co-opted. And I'm actually saying that don't get co-opted by the market, because the market, what it offers you is a different cup of tea altogether. So that was the point that I was trying to make. And the future of feminism, Urvashi began talking about an earlier moment of large-scale feminist movements and mobilizations. She also talked about how maybe these were not getting to be far in between and more remote these days. I think all of us understood the import of what she was saying. Of course, I am not saying that hashtag feminism is the end of all other kinds of mobilizations. What I'm saying is these are complementary. Hashtag feminisms or digital feminisms would give you one way of indulging in coalitional politics. See, for example, it is much more intersectional than an earlier moment, right? When you as a Dalit woman experience an oppression which is very specific to you and to your community, and you put up something around it, the kind of coalitions that gather under your post, it is leaderless in a sense. It is coalitional, it is tentative, it is fluid. These are all problems that it has. At the same time, it nevertheless offers a possibility of a particular kind of, however ephemeral, a coalition coming together into being. It can also spill over. The way in which the digital offers what is called in academic circles rhizomatic possibilities, right? It can move into any other direction. Inji, rhizome. Inji pole engotu venengilum valaram. It can grow in different directions. If you cut a node here, it can erupt somewhere else. Do you understand the political import of that? So it is a moment that I think women definitely can take up, but I'm not saying that it is the end. It needs to be supplemented by larger coalitions built along issues, built along intersectional politics, and taken up. I'm not saying that this kind of digital feminism is the end of it all. It should be harnessed to new possibilities.
If I may just add quickly to that, and then we don't have much time, so we may only be able to take your questions and not respond to them. I want to come back to this question of being called a feminist or being identified as one and people not claiming the word. I think that's a tactic that is used against us to, put us off the track. It does not matter what you call yourself, and people will be scared of the concept which they see as being a subversive concept more and more, precisely because now, as Meena has pointed out, the digital has taken it very far and wide. So, and also it's a concept that comes to us from the West with the whole baggage of history. So never mind what you call yourself. A label is enabling only in as much as you want to own it. I own the word feminism. It's what I live and breathe. But if you don't want to, that's fine. We can still work together. That's important. The second thing about the future of feminism, I don't think it's going anywhere. It's in your hands. The problems are, of course, much greater. The spaces are much more difficult. But we will not give up on the concept, and we will create new strategies, because women are nothing if not imaginative and resourceful and resilient. And the horizon will keep shifting, but it's not going to come to an end. I mean, look at all of you. Are you going to let it end? You're not. So don't worry about it. Just think about how we can work in this restrictive environment. 1 minute, 56 seconds. We can take 2 more questions, please. Just ask your question. I don't know if Meena will have time to answer it. You can have my mic.
Thank you, Urvashi and Meena. This was a very interesting session, I must say. It's not a question. I just want to say that, like, woman is born, but she becomes, one is born, but she becomes a woman, as Simone de Beauvoir said in her book, The Second Sex. What I just want to say is that the society should accept woman as a human being with a mind, body, and soul of her own. I think that is still, that has yet to be accepted in the society. That's what I want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think not only accept women, but accept women and people on the margins and trans and queer and all the other identities that are today entering or becoming part of feminism. Anyone else? Have you got? Yes, please. Quick question or comment? It's the same lady.
Ma'am, this is a very personal question. Actually, mine has been, me and my friends have been the kind of generation which have been very influenced by the Reema Kalingal incident and the Parvati incident and those kind of discussions. And, but as we grew older, into a few years later, we have, like, once we got into the marriageable age, me and my friends are facing, this thing where they are like, that illusion of choice that you talked about. Like, oh, I'm glad that I'm getting to choose how much jewelry I'm wearing. I'm glad I'm getting to choose what kind of sari I'm wearing, that kind of thing. So I am suddenly feeling very helpless about the fact that women like them who had got influenced and validated with that are feeling like this. And I am like, is this my future? Like, that is something that comes into my mind. Can you please explain about that?
The future is in your hands, as Urvashi rightly pointed out, and I think feminisms are safe in your hands, the hands of young women in Kerala. I have immense hope that it will take new possibilities. Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. Any good conversation is a conversation that is incomplete at the end of it. So we will, of course, carry on talking. Thank you for being such a great audience. Meena, thank you very much, and thank you for your book.